Hello everyone. Today, we will be ranking all 14 roller coasters at Hersheypark. This list is based off how much I personally enjoy the coaster, so my list may look quite a bit different than yours. And just note that my personal preference can easily change from time to time, and my ranking is purely based off how I feel as of now. And with that, I have nothing else to go over. So without further ado, let's get started. In last place at number 14, we have Coco Cruiser, a Zamperla family gravity coaster. This is already looking exactly like my Dorney Park coasters ranked. It's already starting to get annoying to keep talking about these types of coasters. There's literally nothing really to say about it. It's just your average kiddie coaster. Nothing really stands out. At the number 13 spot, we have Trailblazer, an aerodynamics mine train. This is probably the weakest mine train out there, and it's only slightly more enjoyable than Coco Cruiser. You may get a little bit of laterals on some of the turns, but it's not much. The ride is a classic though in Hersheypark's lineup, and it's one of the oldest steel coasters in Pennsylvania. Coming in at number 12, we have Wild Mouse, a Mock Rides Wild Mouse. This is just your typical Wild Mouse layout. However, it does run very fast through the layout compared to other Wild Mice. And while that does make the turns and dips a bit more intense, the trains are not very comfortable, and the coaster ends up being rather janky instead. This ride doesn't really have any purpose anymore in Hersheypark's lineup. At number 11, we have Laugh Track, a Mauer spinning coaster. Unlike Wild Mouse, the ride has better trains at the very least. However, the ride barely spins, at least when I ride it. This coaster easily has the best amount of theming at Hersheypark, which is pretty neat. However, the ride is rather tame, as all the mid-course brake runs will slow you down. But it's still a good supporting coaster in Hersheypark's lineup. Hitting the top 10, we have Jolly Rancher Remix of Vekoma Boomerang. This is just your typical boomerang, and I don't know what happened, but this ride got a lot bumpier after the re-theme. I thought this ride felt smoother when it was Sidewinder. Don't get me wrong, the theming and color scheme does look nice, but this ride is bumpy as hell. The inversions are at least forceful, but it still doesn't change the fact it's the worst extreme coaster in Hersheypark's lineup. Dropping in at number 9, we have Super Duper Looper, a Schwarzkopf looping coaster. This ride is a classic and is also glass smooth. However, it's a pretty tame coaster. You get a tiny bit of airtime on the first drop, you get some good positive G's on the vertical loop, and the ending helix also has some mild force. But other than that, it's pretty tame. It's great to ride for your first looping coaster for sure. At number 8, we have a coaster that may surprise you, that being Great Bear, a B&M inverted coaster. Yeah, I think this is a pretty weak invert for me personally. It's not a bad ride or anything, but compared to the coasters coming up, it's on the weaker side. The first drop offers a bit of float if you're sitting on the back left side of the train. You get some good positive G's on the vertical loop, as well as on the Immelman, as well as this helix right off the lift hill. You then have a whippy 0G roll. There's also this little speed hill which gives a tiny bit of airtime. You also have a decently whippy corkscrew. The ride overall has a decent layout, but it's just not quite as intense and fast-paced as I'd like it to be. But it's still a good ride nonetheless. Halfway through the list at the number 7 spot, we have Comet, a PTC wooden coaster. This is the oldest operating coaster in Hersheypark's lineup, and it is definitely a classic. In 2024, this ride got nerfed when the buzz bar restraints were replaced with regular ratcheting lap bars. However, the ride still has some redeeming moments. The first half of the ride is pretty solid. You have an okay drop. You get some airtime entering the turnarounds up front, and airtime dropping off the turnarounds in the back. You also have this drawn out hill which gives some okay airtime as well. All the turnarounds also have some okay laterals. On the second turnaround, however, there's a trim brake that takes away a lot of the speed. After this half hill, where you get some mild airtime up front, the ride basically dies. A lot of the hills in the second half do nothing. You may get an occasional pop of airtime towards the end, if the ride is warmed up. At the end of the day, this ride is still a classic, with some redeeming moments. At number 6, we have Lightning Racer, a GCI dueling racing wooden coaster. This ride is definitely a bit more intense than Comet, Just like Comet, there are moments on this ride that are better in the front, and some moments that are better in the back. You get some airtime in the back row on the first drop, as well as the camelback afterwards, and everyone gets some airtime here on this step down. And entering this turnaround right here has a sharp pop of airtime up front, and some mild airtime in the back. You go over a few other bunny hills after that, getting some mild airtime. You then have the second half of the ride. Some of the hills may give some airtime, others do not. You will also get some mild laterals here and there throughout the ride. Now this ride has two separate sides, and I do slightly prefer the Thunder side, or the green train, but both sides are very similar regardless. Overall, this ride is a little bit better than Comet, as there's some slightly more intense moments. Now in the top 5, we have Skyrush, an Intamin winged hypercoaster. I'm gonna say it, I think this ride is very overrated, even with the new restraints. In fact, it's barely better than the two Woodies in the park for me personally, but I'm gonna talk about the good this ride has. I'm in the minority group of people that actually prefers this ride on the inner seats. I think the wing seats are bumpy as hell, so I've always preferred the inner seats as they're a lot smoother. This ride has a great first drop, which has some floater airtime in the front, and in the back, you get some of the craziest ejector airtime on any coaster. You then have this bunny hill, which offers some strong sustained ejector airtime. You then have this very forceful turn right here. You will then go into another ejector-filled bunny hill. You will then twist up into a Stengel dive, getting some good lateral-filled forces, paired with a quick pop of airtime. After that, you go into this other turn, getting a burst of laterals, while also getting a quick pop of airtime. You then turn up into this S-hill, getting, once again, some lateral and airtime forces. Afterwards, you have one last bunny hill, offering some good ejector airtime, before slowly making your way to the brake run. Overall, this coaster has a decent layout. It's just the restraints that bump this down several spots. At number 4, we have Fahrenheit, an Intamin looping coaster. This is a very unique Intamin to say the least. You have a vertical lift hill, as well as a beyond vertical drop, which offers some crazy ejector airtime. You have a Norwegian loop, which has some airtime on the ascent and descent of the element, and the pull-out in between both inversions is incredibly forceful. Afterwards, you have a Cobra roll, which is pretty mid, but the ride kicks back into overdrive again as you go through 2 back-to-back corkscrews, which offer some good whip. You then zip around a turn, before going into an ejector-filled bunny hill, before zipping around one last turn into the brakes. I find this coaster to be better than Skyrush for having better restraints, as well as better elements overall. Finally hitting the final 3, we have Stormrunner, an Intamin accelerator. This ride is absolutely spectacular. You have a forceful hydraulic launch, followed by an incredibly forceful top hat, getting strong positive and negative Gs in the process. You then have a Cobra loop that may cause you to gray out a bit. You then have a flying snake dive, which consists of a powerful ejector airtime moment, followed by 2 hangtime-filled inversions. This ride is a bit short, but it throws so much at you that it earns the top 3 spot in this list. All the way up at number 2, we have Candemonium, a B&M hypercoaster. This coaster is filled to the brim with floater airtime. You have a fantastic first drop that is amazing no matter where you sit, especially in the back row. You have 2 massive camelbacks offering several seconds of sustained floater airtime. In addition, you also have this glorious speed hill, and there's many more great elements as well. This ride is an absolute bang from start to finish. Now I wonder what could be number 1. And finally, at number 1, we have Wildcat's Revenge, an RMC iBox hybrid coaster. This is easily the best coaster at Hersheypark, and it's not even close. You have an absolutely crazy pre-lift section. You have a great first drop, 4 spectacular inversions, and tons of moments of ejector airtime. In fact, this is my number 2 coaster overall as of now, and for a very good reason. And that right there is my ranking of all 14 roller coasters at Hersheypark. How do you rank the roller coasters at Hersheypark? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.